So our gospel today. Jesus gives us 3 conditions for being his disciple. Or you could think of it as 3 conditions for salvation. The first is to hate your father, your mother, your wife, your children, your brother, your sister, and your own life. The second is to carry your cross. And the third is to renounce all possessions. Putting all of those together, essentially Jesus is saying that we need to place God first, that we need to have complete surrender to God. But I wanted to talk a little bit about each of those. More focus on the second one, but at least a little bit on all 3 of those. So first, hate your father, your mother, your wife, children, brother, sister, and your own life. Hopefully I'm hoping that you've heard this before, that hate does not mean hate, the way that we think of hate. Jesus isn't telling you that you need to hate your family members. What he's using here is a normal Jewish type of hyperbole to show preference. So in other words, using a word stronger than what is really meant in order to convey a message. And so what he's telling us here is that the preference must be God. That we must love God more than others and even more than we love ourselves. Again, this doesn't mean that we hate people. That would be going against the commandments, to love our neighbor as ourselves and to love our neighbor and love God first. And of course, especially to honor your father and your mother. So Jesus is not going against the commandments. He's just simply using a phrase, a way of speaking to make a point. To love God first and foremost, while of course loving our family and ourselves. The second one is to carry our cross. And what does that mean? That means essentially self-sacrifice. So many people try to avoid their cross. We all have crosses, but many of us try to avoid them. Maybe because our cross, our particular cross, we think is too difficult. Or maybe we just simply don't want to suffer and we don't want to sacrifice anything. We've heard so many times that if we live a good life, then nothing bad will happen to us. But that's impossible. And Jesus never promised that to us. In fact, he promised us the opposite. Some may try to exchange their cross for a smaller cross. And sometimes we do this because we look at other people and we think that they don't have crosses. But they do. Everybody has a cross. Maybe they're just more successful at carrying their cross or hiding their cross from others. But everyone has it. There's a phrase that you've probably heard, and in certain areas of Christianity, it's quite popular. And it goes something like, God doesn't give you more than you can handle. Right? You probably heard that. God never gives you more than you can handle. That is false. God can give you more than you can handle. That's part of growing. And in fact, it's a terrible way of thinking, because when we do inevitably fall, one or two things can happen, or both of them can happen. Either we can think that we are a failure, and then we're going to get down on ourselves, and we're going to hate ourselves because we couldn't handle what God gave to us. Or because we fail, we blame God, which should never happen. So this phrase, God doesn't give you more than you can handle, is meant to give you comfort, but in fact it can be very damaging. A better way of thinking of it is that God gives you what you can handle with Him. So God, again, sometimes will give you more than you can handle on your own. But that's because we need to rely on Him. to help get through those most difficult times. So, speaking of carrying crosses and sacrifices and suffering, I think it's appropriate that this weekend is Labor Day weekend, and to think a little bit about labor and work. So for most people, work is a negative word only. We don't want to work. We never want to work. We want to be able to be on vacation all the time. We want to be able to do whatever we want all the time. But that's not the way that we're made. And that's not the way that the Catholic Church sees it. The Catholic Church sees labor as a necessary aspect of humanity and of love. Many popes have written about this, especially in the last 150 years or so. And most of the time they write about this or speak about this in conjunction with St. Joseph the worker, who is the great example of a laborer who labored to care for the Holy Family. And he also taught that work ethic to Jesus. To steal from St. John Paul II, well, not steal, just quote. St. John Paul II once said, "Work is, as has been said, an obligation, that is to say, a duty on the part of man. Man must work, both because the Creator has commanded it and because of his own humanity, which requires work in order to be maintained and developed. Man must work out of regard for others, especially his own family, but also for the society he belongs to, the country of which he is a child, and the whole human family of which he is a member, since he is the heir to the work of generations and at the same time a sharer in building the future of those who will come after him in the succession of history." So again, what he's saying here is that work is our obligation as humans to be part of humanity. We work to help our families. We work to help our communities. We work to help our nation. And we work to help build up humanity. And we do that because those who came before us did it, and we are trying to build a better future for those who come after us. And we must work to do that. And the unfortunate thing is that many people have lost the dignity of work because we have lost the dignity of the worker. Now, here I'm going to have to go a little bit into my history of technology, which you probably know is what I did before I was a priest. But this is an unfortunate result of the Industrial Revolution. And I will say that the Industrial Revolution is one of the worst things that ever happened to us as humans. And the reason why is because more machines means humans are less important. The more we rely on machines to do work, the less that humans are important. And so to speak, humans become just a cog in the machine. Because workers became interchangeable. Right? If somebody doesn't work well, then we can just get rid of them and hire the next person, and they can do the same job. So they're just part of this machine. And so because workers are interchangeable, employers don't need to care for them. And because of that, and because of all of this, workers lost their pride in their work. So if we think about it, before the Industrial Revolution, people might labor for days, weeks, even months to build a single project, which meant that they took care in that project. They loved their work. They put so much heart into their work. But now, and since the Industrial Revolution, you could build thousands of whatever it is in a day. And therefore, who cares? There's no pride in it. There's no love for your work. Again, going to St. John Paul II, he said, "Work has been profaned by sin and contaminated by egoism, and therefore it must be redeemed. And it was redeemed by Christ, who worked and which helped him develop his own humanity." And JP2 said that work needs to be separated from the seductive and merciless idol of wealth. which kind of connects with the third point of today's gospel. But what he's saying here is that for too many people, especially in the industrialized world, work is tied with wealth. And wealth becomes everything. So everything is geared towards becoming as wealthy as possible. And that wealth becomes our idol, our God. And that's all that we care about. Again, this isn't everybody, but this is many people, or it can become many people. And we have to remember that work is for man, not man for work. What makes a life great is not the entity of gain, nor the type of profession or the level of career. Man is worth infinitely more than the goods he produces or possesses. Your worth has nothing to do with your work. It has nothing to do with how much money you make. It has nothing to do with how many possessions you have. It has nothing to do with your position. Your worth is inherent in being a human and made in the image and likeness of God. Now, the sad truth is that many people today are not working because they don't see the point. And here I'm going to quote two passages from Paul in his letters to the Thessalonians. So first he says, aspire to live a tranquil life, to mind your own affairs, and to work with your hands as we instructed you, that you may conduct yourselves properly toward outsiders and not depend on anyone. And then he goes on to say, if anyone was unwilling to work, neither should that one eat. Again, work is a necessary part of being humans. And it's part of building up our dignity, the dignity of humanity, and to build up humanity for the next generation to come. So going back to what Jesus was talking about, the third part that we must do is to renounce our possessions. And renouncing possessions doesn't mean giving up everything. Now, some people do that. There have been extreme examples of that in the church, like St. Anthony of the Desert, who sold everything that he had and became a hermit, and he was one of the greatest saints of all time. I'm not telling you to do that. Renouncing possessions means to be detached from them, to not have our possessions own us, to not have those possessions as the most important thing in our life, to be okay with losing our possessions if that's the will of God, because God has to come first. So we should never put our possessions above God. So again, taken all together, our gospel today is a reminder that we need to put God first in everything that we do. And so we ask God for the strength to place him first, always as he commanded, to carry our crosses and to labor well for the dignity of humanity, to love God without counting the cost.